What's going on, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where you can get maximum truth and minimum bullshit. I am Darkside Phil, and I am independent, meaning I don't work for any particular company. I am a machinima partner, and therefore it allows me to play games and actually give you my honest feelings, my honest ratings. And one thing that I like to do is when I give my reviews, to compare the game's experience to all the other games out during that period of time, to try to give you, in terms of scale, how I really feel on a 1 to 10 scale the game really should be scored. Therefore, my scores for most games end up being a little bit lower than the mainstream, just to warn everyone, because they usually like to overinflate their scores. I just want to warn everyone, I am suffering from allergies. It's just turned spring here, and I am suffering from some congestion, some nasal drippage. So I might sneeze, or I might have to unfortunately blow my nose or something during this review, so please bear with me. Just a little precursor. So today, we're going to talk about only the second handheld game that I've ever reviewed. Now, this is a game that came out in 2010, but I did not get a chance to grab it until earlier this year. It is for the Nintendo DS. It is called Golden Sun Dark Dawn. Now, if you're not familiar with the Golden Sun line of games, they are JRPGs, meaning Japanese-style role-playing games, and primarily they've been on handheld systems. There were actually 2 of them on the Game Boy Advance. This was the first one, I believe, for the Nintendo DS, and I could be wrong. It could be the second one for the Nintendo DS, so don't quote me on that. But this series kind of touts itself on having a combination of gameplay from traditional turn-based Japanese-style role-playing games, but also some of the puzzle and action-based gameplay of games like Zelda, okay? So it's going to have turn-based battles, very similar to the classic old Final Fantasy games, Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey, those kind of games where, random enemy encounter, you have a party, you can either attack, you can run away, you can use magic. One of the unique things about the Golden Sun series is that it features a series of creatures called Djinn, okay? Now, it could be pronounced Djinn, because it's spelled D-J-I-N-N. I'm just going to call them Djinn for the purposes of this review, because I'm not sure exactly what they're really supposed to be pronounced as. And the way it works is that you will find these little Pokemon-looking like creatures throughout the game world. Some of them are going to be hidden in certain areas, and you have to uncover a puzzle or find a way to get to it for it to join your party. Other times they'll be just out in the open. Other times you just get them as part of the main story of the game. And there's 4 different kinds. There's fire, earth, ice, and electricity. Although sometimes the electricity kind of also includes wind, so it's a little bit ambiguous in that respect. And similarly, sometimes the fire also has some earth mixed in, so sometimes there's some crossover, okay? And the way that it works is it's standard turn-based combat, just like any other JRPG. However, there's a twist. You have these Djinn that you equip on your characters, and it's a 4th option. Rather, instead of attack, use an item, use your magic, there's also use a Djinn. And when you use a Djinn, each one has a completely unique ability. So maybe one of them will cast a defensive wall around your entire party for that turn. Maybe one of them will spout out an attack that'll damage your enemy, or maybe confuse your enemy so they can't attack for that particular turn. Once you use a Djinn, it then goes to what's called standby mode. And once you have enough Djinn of certain types in standby mode, you can then use something that's called a summon. Now, this is another, kind of a different thing thrown in. And you might think at first it's a little bit confusing, because it is a little bit more complicated than a standard JRPG. But honestly, once you play for an hour or 2 and you get used to this Djinn system, you get into the flow of it, and it doesn't seem that difficult. So what summons are similar to like in Final Fantasy, where you summon giant monsters to do attacks or use status buffs to your party, etc. Same thing here, same premise. Instead of summoning them using your MP, you're now using these Djinn that you've been using over the past several turns that are now in this standby mode. So for example, if you use 3 fire Djinn for 3 turns, and they're all in standby mode, for the 4th turn, you can then choose to use them to summon a big monster, okay? Once the monster is summoned, it'll usually attack multiple enemies or whatever on the screen, and then those Djinn will go into recovery mode, which means for about 1 turn you can't use them at all. Then they'll usually go back to a mode where the next turn you can use them again. So a little bit on the unique side, because not only is the game about leveling up your characters to get the best magic and abilities, finding the best loot. Obviously, there's swords, there's equipment that you can find and equip in this game, but also about finding the best djinn. And there are a lot of different djinn that actually will give your characters better magic, better abilities, similar to how, if anyone has played Final Fantasy VII, how back then you used to equip different materia, and the different materia gave you better abilities and such. So, the combat is pretty standard JRPG combat with a little bit of a twist with the djinn thrown in there, okay? The other gameplay is the puzzle aspect, and what happens is that over the course of the game, your characters will actually gain special abilities that they can use on the world screen, okay? So what I mean is, sure, you'll learn fire spells you can learn in combat, but you'll also learn a fire spell that you can use outside of combat when you're just traversing the maps of the world. And it could be very special things. For example, one of them allows you to move heavy objects across the ground. One of them allows you to make a vine grow where you see a little sprout. One of them allows you to cast a whirlwind. One of them allows you to cast a fireball. And all these abilities will eventually have special things that happen to certain areas of the world map that you're traveling to. So, for example, you might, at the beginning of the game, see a high cliff, and you can't get to it, but you see a sprout at the top. Later on in the game, maybe you'll end up there, and you'll be able to cast your grow ability, and the vine will give you a shortcut down to the bottom of the cliff. So that's the kind of stuff that it is, and it's very similar, like I said, to a lot of the Zelda-like puzzles. Remember in Zelda, you just put a bomb down, it would blow up the wall, or you would have these special abilities you would cast with the torch or whatever, and you could light lanterns, and then all of a sudden the puzzle would be solved. Very similar here, very reminiscent of that Zelda-like gameplay when it comes to these puzzles. The puzzles range from extremely simple, meaning, wow, there's 2 blocks in the room, there's a gap I have to jump, maybe I move the blocks into place so that I can jump across the top of the rocks and get across the gap, to some pretty complex ones that actually require you to return to certain areas later on in the game, even though normally, you know, the story of the game wouldn't take you back to that area, to use your newly learned spells and abilities to solve the puzzles. And so there is going to be some backtracking that you can have in the game. Now, let's talk a little bit about Golden Sun. Golden Sun is a series about a world in peril, and usually has something to do with elements or something. Golden Sun Dark Dawn is a direct sequel to the previous title in the series, meaning if you didn't play the previous title, you're going to be a little bit confused, but the game does a good job at catching you up to what happened in the previous installment of Golden Sun. So what happened in the previous installment? Well, there were 4 heroes of the realm. They have a particular name. I forget what they're called. And they had traveled the globe, lighting up these 4 elemental lighthouses, which then restored the magical power to the world and saved it. However, the problem now is what they're finding is that the elemental power is kind of out of control. There are whirlwinds, there are whirlpools, there are droughts, there are things going on, earthquakes, that are harming the people of the planet. So kind of was like a necessary evil. They had to turn the lighthouses on to save the world, but now they're suffering with all these natural disasters as of the repercussions of that. So, Dark Dawn picks up some years after the ending of the last Golden Sun game. You actually play as the children of the 4 heroes, okay? And you have very similar powers to your parents. What you find is that your parents have not aged a day for whatever reason, because they weren't involved with what they call the Golden Sun incident from the previous games. They do not age, but you do. And so it's basically a coming-of-age story where these kids are setting off on basically a very minor, trivial task. What ends up happening is at the beginning of the game, one of the characters, who, you know, the typical teenage character who doesn't listen to his parents and has to be you know, troublemaking and fun-loving, he jumps on this glider and destroys it, okay? He ends up getting stranded at the bottom of a mountain, and come to find out, in order to repair it, you need a very special feather called the Mountain Rock Feather from a mountain rock, but he's like on the other side of the world, and so you set off yourself, your team of friends who are the children of these heroes from the previous game, to try to go and get a feather to repair this glider. Now, of course, that sounds very trivial for a JRPG, and it is, and over the course of the game, what ends up happening is you find out it's not as easy as you thought it was going to be. There are many roadblocks and hindrances on your path to getting this feather to actually repair the glider, and it becomes a multi-layered, multifaceted story with all kinds of supporting characters and people that join your party. You start off with only 3 characters in your party. By the end of the game, you have 8 different characters you can play as in your party, and you can have 4 characters fighting at any time. So whenever you're in battles, you can control 4 of those characters. And you soon find out that there's some kind of a weird conspiracy going on. There seem to be these group of dark characters who you're not sure who they are. They're kind of called the Dark Adepts. And they have really powerful abilities, and they're trying to push you in a general direction. They're not necessarily forcing you to do anything, but they're kind of pushing you to go do stuff that may help you in your end goal to get the Mountain Rock Feather, but then actually later on ends up having some dire consequences. Now, I don't want to ruin the story too much for anyone who hasn't played the game, but basically, through a series of misadventures and misguidance, the children of the heroes of the world end up screwing the world over about 3/4 through the game, and then in the last quarter of the game have to figure out a way to solve this problem. So, it's kind of interesting and weird in the same sense, because the first 3/4 of the game are very linear. And when I say that, I mean, even though there is a world map and you can pretty much walk wherever you want a lot of the time, you won't be able to do anything significant in these open areas until a certain story point hits. So maybe you'll be able to go to this certain town, you know, a couple hours in the story before anything takes place in the story, but you're really not going to find much there besides maybe 1 or 2 hidden Jinn that you got through puzzle solving. It's very linear for the first 3/4 of the game. Then all of a sudden, once this thing happens that kind of dooms the world, now you get a ship, and for the first time in the entire game, you get to sail across the entire map, well, as an open world, and now the game kind of allows you to do a certain set of goals in whatever order you like. So for the first time, they kind of give you the ability to explore the globe and do it in the order that you like about 3/4 through the game. Now, really, when it comes down to it, there's not a lot of side content in Dark Dawn. Dark Dawn is primarily just about getting through the campaign and beating it, and then once you beat the story mode, you can do a New Game Plus that resets a little bit of the story, goes back a couple hours in the story, but you still retain all your stats from the end of the game, and it opens up 4 optional dungeons for you to traverse at the end of the game. And they are optional. Some of them are kind of interesting, others are very short. They all feature a very powerful boss battle, and it's neat because those bosses, when you defeat them, end up becoming more powerful summoned creatures that you can summon. But it's kind of like a little too late, because you've beaten the whole game already. So really, besides the 4 optional dungeons, where else are you going to use these summons? There's really no other reason to have them. So it was a little bit of a disappointment that really in this game there's not a lot of side content, and the only side content available opens up after the game's already over. That is a little bit of a frustration. That being said, Dark Dawn, if you rush through it, you could probably beat it in about 20 to 25 hours. I took my time, and by the time I had beaten the game and done all the optional stuff, it was around 40 hours of gameplay. So keep in mind, though, with a JRPG, a big chunk of that is the repetitive combat. So if you're not into the repetitive style JRPG combat, I don't recommend this game. It really does not have a lot of action-based stuff besides those puzzles that you solve. So if you like solving interesting puzzles, this game might be up your alley, because it does have a lot of those. There's no multiplayer or anything like that. It is just a straight-up single-player game. The graphics are pretty much on par for the Nintendo DS, meaning kind of like an upscale Nintendo 64 looking game. It was kind of funny because when the Nintendo 64 was out, there were massive complaints that where were all the JRPGs? Everyone had waited a long time and wanted to see where they were going to be, and not many ever came out for the N64. Most of them came out for the PlayStation, and people were really disappointed. Now it seems like the Nintendo DS got a lot of those games for whatever reason. But overall, it's a pretty good game. My only complaints are, number one, it is a little bit on the easy side, meaning once you master the Jinn system, it's really not that hard of a game. I think that really the difficulty of the game comes in mastering the Jinn system and understanding, gee, what kind of battle should I go into having several Jinn set on standby so right away I can blast away with powerful summons? Or what Jinn should I equip on my character because they're the better Jinn that are going to help us overall in these kind of battles that we're in? So really I think that's where the difficulty of the game lies, and not really in the basic combat of the game. That being said, the final 4 dungeons are pretty difficult and are pretty challenging. Even if you've beaten the entire game up to that point, you are going to get some significant challenge out of them. Excuse me, I warned you that might happen. The other thing that was kind of a disappointment to me is that I think it's cool that it seems the Golden Sun line of games are all continuous, meaning that each one leads into the next one plot-wise. That's always cool because you feel like you're coming back to a familiar story. It's not like the Final Fantasy line of games where it seems like every numbered Final Fantasy is a completely different universe. But that being said, I did feel left out that I had not played the previous Golden Sun game. It seems like I would have maybe picked up on a lot of stuff. Like, there are a lot of references to characters from the past game. There are some characters from the past game that show up in this game. And I didn't really understand that because I didn't play the previous game. In addition, I do want to warn everyone, this game ends on an amazing cliffhanger, and it really doesn't have a definitive ending. Meaning you're in this quest to save the world, you're just about to save the world, and that's it. Credits roll and says you beat the game, and then it warps you back to the world map, and next thing you know, all you have left to do are the 4 optional dungeons, and you're like, well, shit, what happened? You know, it was a big cliffhanger. It doesn't really give you a resolution at the end, and so it is a little bit of a disappointment in that regard. Now, let me tell you, it did a great job because I am actually excited to play the next Golden Sun game, and I'm actually going to do research now to find out if they ever did come out with another one for the DS that's the sequel to this, or if maybe the next one's going to be on the 3DS. So I'm going to do a little bit of research myself. If anyone wants to reply to the comments of this video in regards to that, and let everyone know, that would definitely be a welcome thing. But for what it is, Golden Sun Dark Dawn, classic JRPG gameplay with some cool elements mixed in with the Jin system, and the fact that there's a lot of puzzle solving a la Zelda. I did enjoy the story, even though it wasn't like, you know, again, it was kind of a cliffhanger ending, and it seemed to be a continuous story. You do miss out a little bit if you haven't played the previous games. I did still enjoy it, and the fact that it is a pretty lengthy game, for the fact that it is a mobile game, but you're only paying, what, $40? I mean, I got this game used, so I paid like $25, $28 or something like that for it, and I got a lot of gameplay out of it, so it is a pretty good bang for your buck. Being that it came out 2 years ago, you could probably get it for a pretty good discount. So I'm gonna rate Golden Sun Dark Dawn in comparison to all the other games that I've been playing roughly. I'm gonna give it a 7.5. It's pretty good. It's definitely better than an average JRPG. But at the same time, it doesn't really do anything original or different. The Jin system has been around in Golden Sun for quite a while. I actually played one of the much older Golden Sun games, and it had the similar Jin system, so it's not like they're innovating or anything here. It's just pretty much more of the same with the new story and improved graphics. So it's definitely, if you like JRPGs and you want a good one, a solid one for your handheld system, either your DS or Nintendo 3DS, because obviously it works with both, it's definitely a good game to pick up, especially because at this point you could probably get it for a discounted price. But I didn't feel it was innovative, I didn't feel it like blew me away, and I was a little bit disappointed at the cliffhanger ending and the lack of side content. So I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Okay, so that's it this time around for the Hateful Truth video game review series. I hope you found the review informative. I hope now you understand a little bit better whether or not you'd actually like to check out Golden Sun Dark Dawn, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot.